which is one of the feared consequences of this, then you could almost end up with a cause for conflict.
Yes, I think this is precisely where the sort of hard geopolitical issues arise. I mean, to put it in a kind of crude way, whose hand is on the thermostat? Essentially, the scientists and technocrats, including myself, I guess, are helping to invent a thermostat knob. But it's much easier to invent the knob than to figure out who should be in charge of it in a world with many states.
No, indeed, and I want to come on to the governance, but I want to ask specifically about the science of this, which is how far can you tell whether the effects of solar radiation management are then going to cause perhaps a catastrophic loss of rainfall in a certain part of the world. At the moment, it seems to be hazy, this.
I think it's not as hazy as that. So using exactly the same climate models as we've used to estimate the problems with CO2 in the atmosphere, the underlying climate problem, we've applied those same models and same techniques to look at this. And the results so far, I have to say, look pretty good. That's why we're paying any attention to it. So in fact, the results look like for small amounts of SRM, it is remarkably even, more even than we expected. And the benefits in terms of reducing climate impacts are substantial.
Right. I mean, I'm quoting again from one recent study, Nature Geoscience, which suggested that engineered cooling of this sort would lead to a much bigger loss of rainfall in China than in India. That doesn't seem to tally with what you're just saying.
I think we're saying the same thing. I've been authors of a bunch of those studies. I mean, one of the issues is whether you're talking about doing it extreme amount, whether you're talking about doing enough SRM to compensate for all of the CO2 in the atmosphere or doing a little bit. And there's more evidence that doing a little bit would be beneficial than doing a lot. And there's no question that it's unequal, but the inequalities in practice, when you actually look at it numerically, don't appear so far to be that big. But all that folks like I am saying is that we should do more research to find out.
More research. I guess the problem with more research is that the research itself could lend itself to consequences which could be damaging. I mean, if you think about drugs trials, for example,
Yep.
The best drugs trials, by and large, are the ones that are done on the largest scale. If you do something like this on a very large scale, you could be talking about affecting huge swathes of the planet.
Yes, but at least at present, nobody's talking about that. So to me, in the near term, research means research with computer models and research where we test the effects, say, on the ozone layer of very small quantities of these particles, much too small to change the whole climate.
Forgive me for interrupting. You say computer models. Isn't one of the problems with the climate and studying the climate is that it's incredibly difficult to know exactly how it works. It is very difficult to model.
Sure, it's impossible to know exactly, but you can still learn a lot.
Fine, but this is at some point going to leap from the computer screen into real life, and that's the point at which there could be danger.
First of all, we need to make a decision to do that. I, at least, am not ready right now to say that we ought to do that. We need to do the other research first. If at some point it actually makes sense to do this, we would presumably start with very tiny amounts of aerosol, an amount less than a big volcano, and we would ramp it up very slowly, watching for ill effects and benefits as we did that over a decade or two. And you would monitor the system, and if you saw problems, you'd stop. That still doesn't guarantee you safety. There is no guarantee of safety here. But remember, the benefits are also large. So one of the most obvious things that we understand about climate impacts is heat stress on crops. A bunch of the poor farmers in the world, the most likely impact they'll see from climate is that the peak temperatures reduce the productivity of crops a lot. And first-order models that we've actually run with crop models suggest that SRM could significantly reduce that impact. And that's a big deal for a lot of poor people on this planet.
Given that you're talking about beginning at a relatively small scale, I'm wondering what your reaction is to the postponement of a study here in the United Kingdom. It was the SPICE project, the Stratospheric Particle Injection for Climate Engineering project, which was planning to send a balloon